WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robyn Vincent. We begin inside homes across Metro Detroit, where over the weekend, many families were not relaxing. They were in the dark, listening to 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Others were watching the water line creep up in their basements after days of rain. When we talk about environmental risk, we're talking about the collision between volatile weather, intensified by human-caused climate change, and fragile aging infrastructure. It's the risk that your lights won't stay on, your basement won't stay dry, and your utility bills will keep rising, even as reliability doesn't. Nearly 95,000 households lost power in this latest storm. The lights are now back on for many, but the frustration hasn't dimmed, especially since DTE Energy's latest $242 million rate hike. Today marks the start of Severe Weather Awareness Week. Governor Whitmer is urging you to know your plan. But for many Detroiters and Metro Detroiters, the plan is at the mercy of a grid and a regional geography that feels fragile. To help us look past the downed limbs and into the systems that are failing, I'm joined by Nicholas Schroeck. He's the Dean of University of Detroit Mercy School of Law and a leading expert on environmental policy. Dean Schroeck, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we just survived a weekend of mass outages and flood watches. When you look at the map of Metro Detroit today, what are the two or three biggest forces that are driving this level of environmental risk?
Extreme weather. I mean, this is something that when we look at our, increasing heavy rain storms that we have spring, summer, fall, that's definitely because that's what drives flooding, where we have challenges with our infrastructure being able to handle those intense storms. So that's number one. And then I think you hit on number two, which is these increasing high winds that, again, from the same, just more energy in the atmosphere with a warming climate. We're getting more of these straight line wind events associated with thunderstorms. We're also seeing an increase in these just low pressure systems that are moving across the continent, driving wind in different directions. It's interesting. Like a lot of the heavy winds were coming out of the south, right, which is sort of strange for us. Normally we're used to those west to east winds, and so I would say heavy precipitation events and then high winds, whether it's from storms or just these intensified low pressure systems we see moving across the continent.
When we think about this kind of extreme weather, what do you think right now then do we most misunderstand? I mean, where is the story we tell ourselves about our environment actually breaking down?
The intersection between changing weather and it's weather and climate, but these more intense storms and our ability of our infrastructure to adapt and to be responsive to these more intense storms. I think that's where the rub is right now. And so we have, you hit on it in the opening, aging infrastructure where there's been a lot of deferred maintenance or lack of investment over many decades. And then we have more intense rainfall. We'll likely see bigger snowstorms too. It's kind of interesting. People think with climate change that you're likely to just see warmer weather all the time. No, it's disruptions of what has been sort of normal weather patterns. So we'll likely see slightly warmer trends in the winter where that'll then allow more moisture to come in and we'll have bigger snowfall. Like we're seeing now in other parts of the country, right? Like the East Coast just got walloped with that really large nor'easter a couple weeks ago, over a foot of snow in Rhode Island and Boston, and we'll see those types of systems with more frequency because there's just, again, more energy in the atmosphere. So that's where, I don't know. I mean, how do you think we'd do in Detroit with a foot of snow? How do you think we'd handle that, right? I think we'd have some challenges. We don't do very well with 5 inches of snow, so.
Right, or 2,
right,
or 3
right.
inches. And then the irony, as you and I were just discussing before we got on the mics, So we're seeing flooding here. We're seeing extreme weather on one side of the spectrum. And then in the western part of the country, it is parched.
Right.
It is unseasonably warm and unseasonably dry. And so we've got extremes on both ends. And do you suspect, I mean, this is going to continue, and it's going to continue in a more intensified way then?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just look today. You've got this really abnormal tropical storm hitting the Hawaiian Islands. They're getting several inches of rain, and then there's this heat dome over the west and southwest. I think Phoenix is looking at 110 degrees maybe over the next couple of days, which is pretty strange in the month of March to have that intense warming. And then, here, just look at our ups and downs over the last couple of weeks. Yesterday was about 70 degrees in Metro Detroit, and then tomorrow it'll be in the 20s. And so it's just really dramatic. And part of what's going on here, or a big part of what's going on here, is with a warming climate, there's a disruption to the jet stream, right? So the prevailing atmospheric winds that blow across the North American continent, that prevailing wind is being disrupted by changing ocean temperatures, which leads to changing air currents. And so you're seeing more of these ridges where you'll have hot air pushing way up into the mountain west, which then draws down cold Arctic air over the Midwest and New England. And then you just kind of see these wild fluctuations. And that's very challenging for even things like roads, bridges, where you have these quick warm-ups that'll thaw, and then you have the freezing again. That's just leads to a lot of disruption and the freeze-thaw cycle of the earth, but then that leads to heaving one side of the road and the other, and then potholes and all that kind of stuff. So it's again, these freeze and thaw variations are a challenge for infrastructure. We see more water main breaks again where you have that happening. So you're absolutely right. Across the country, we're looking at more droughts, more rain, more forest fires. It's just a real challenge because of this warming climate that we're now in.
Okay, so climate change and aging infrastructure are colliding here. That's the overarching
Yes.
theme of what we're talking about. And specifically here in Metro Detroit, we're looking at an older region. And that makes these risks harder to manage. First of all, what does it mean to be an older region?
So Detroit, we're a city that really rapidly expanded during the industrialization era. So think late 1800s through the mid 1900s. And so a lot of our infrastructure, water mains, sewers, roads, bridges were really built in the early to mid 1900s. And some of that has been updated, but there's been a lot of our particularly things below ground that have not been updated. And that's where we really face a challenge. So going back to talk about increased rain events and flooding in metropolitan Detroit, we are on a combined sewer system. So when we have rain that washes into the storm drains along our roads and streets, that then combines with our sanitary sewers. And that's just the way that these systems were designed back in the day. So when you have a big rain event, combines with the sanitary sewer, and then the system really can't handle that big influx of water. And that's what leads to basement backups or uncontrolled or partially controlled releases into the Detroit River. Now, if you build a city today, if we just could wave a wand and build Detroit today, we would not do that, right? We would have a separate sewer, we'd have a storm sewer and a sanitary sewer developed separately.
That's my question to you is this combined system something that we see in newer regions in the country? For example, some of the areas we were just talking about in the western part of the country, let's say like in Denver, Colorado.
Separate. So if you look around the Great Lakes region, some of our, again, older cities that have been here and developed earlier in our country's history, so Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, we've got these combined sewer systems, right? When you look at newer cities and certainly even suburban communities around Metro Detroit, they're separating those storm sewers from the sanitary sewers to just take that risk. Again, and it doesn't even take that dramatic of a rainstorm. A couple inches of rain over 4, 5, 6 hour period, even over a day, can put a lot of stress on our water system, particularly our sewer system. And that's what leads to, again, basements backing up or partially or untreated sewage getting into the Detroit River, Rouge River. And so that's just one example of where we have this collision of a warming climate, which means more energy in the atmosphere, which leads to bigger rainstorms, bigger snowfalls, and then an infrastructure that wasn't designed to accommodate that type of volume, right, coming into it. And then again, with just sort of deferred maintenance and lack of investment over many years, you've got some flaws in the system, some risk in the system, some weak points that we often see exposed when you have, again, a flooding event or these other type of just intensified climate storms that we're seeing.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Nicholas Schroeck. He's a leading environmental expert and dean of the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. We're talking about how environmental risks have been intensified by climate change and aging infrastructure, and what that means for you and me. Now, of course, Dean Schroeck, this brings me to the question of the day, which is accountability. Mm-hmm. We're talking about systems that are failing, people losing power, basements flooding, people getting sick from air pollution. We see a lot of finger pointing between the city, the state, and utilities about all of these problems. Who should we be trying to hold accountable here? I don't like that you just laughed, by the way.
Well, it's and not because it's a funny
of course.
discussion, but because it is a really complicated question and a complicated series of answers, I think, that when we talk about accountability. Because if we go just sort of big picture, 30,000 feet, when we talk about a warming climate, that is, we've known about the science of climate change for a long time. Setting aside a lot of the disinformation and disingenuous political arguments that are often made about climate change, the science is settled. We know that human activity, burning fossil fuels, is leading to a warming world and has led to a warming world. So when you look at blame there, you can look at fossil fuel companies, you can look at politicians, you can go back, automotive companies, certainly to an extent, that have been fighting transition to cleaner vehicles and renewable energy and that type of thing.
When we think about this accountability, what's the clearest path? I mean, of the huge players that you just mentioned, who might me, the little guy, actually have the best chance of holding accountable?
Well, it's sort of like, the old saying, all politics are local. I mean, really, it's from an individual person's perspective. Accountability is really with local political influence. I think is the easiest thing to talk about. So that would mean your state representative, your state senator, governor, and then our elected officials, particularly Congress, but also U.S. senators, because they're the ones that are making policy decisions that can either hold big industry accountable, shift their attention from, again, a fossil fuel past to a renewable energy future. That's really where we can work for accountability. And if our elected officials are not working in that direction, then you vote them out, right? I mean, that's the easiest. Now, there's also some litigation strategies. You're seeing, and this is sort of like whack-a-mole, but if you look at the largest energy companies, ExxonMobil, right, Chevron, these really large oil and gas companies, there's litigation strategies where you have groups of children that are suing these companies, saying that they're basically putting their future health and economic viability at risk because of what they're doing right now.
They're
and so you're
suing them for intensifying climate change.
Exactly, right. For past harm, but also for future risk. And so you're seeing more of these lawsuits brought in federal court. The issue there is that it's sort of like you're picking one, and you can go for these major companies, and you can look at the percentages of greenhouse gases and how that then correlates to the warming temperatures, all that. Like, you can do the math there and try and hold these individual companies accountable. But what you really need is national standards and then international agreements. And so one of the things that's very frustrating in our sort of global geopolitical discourse right now, or lack of discourse, is that there's a move towards isolationism. There's a move towards countries, acting more unilaterally, with the United States really taking a lead there. And that's problematic, because what we really need are global agreements to kind of rein in these heavily polluting industries. And again, this isn't something new. I'm not saying anything brilliant here. This is what we've known and been trying to work on for decades. But that all then filters down. When you talk about accountability, it really is, it's political. There's also some legal strategies, but the legal strategies are a bit handcuffed by the fact that you're going after sort of like individual companies or groups of companies.
Do we have a better chance, given how polarized the national political climate is, to look more locally? I'm thinking about the state legislature, for example.
Yep.
This month, state lawmakers proposed amending the Michigan Constitution to have voters select members of the Public Service Commission. And the Public Service Commission is approving DTE's rate hikes.
That's
right. What do you make of that proposal?
I think it's interesting. In general, more ability for the public to be involved in decision making, I think, is a good thing, because when you talk to people, I think in general people get it, they understand, and it's, you get this interference that's run between lobbyists and politicians, between what the public knows and understands and wants, and what we see as outcomes from our legislature. So again, I think that type of more direct democracy for things like utility decision making could be a good thing. Now, of course, we'd have to see what that looks like. Is it representative? Are you considering urban areas and rural areas the same? So I think there's still some questions to be answered there, but in general, I think that sort of direct democracy can be important, because again, there's a disconnect often between when you either talk to people or see polling about what folks care about in terms of their health and their environment, and then the outcomes we get from our legislature. There's a big divergence there, and so something's getting lost in translation between what and I have conversations with people left, right, center all the time, and people care about the quality of the air. They want clean water to drink. They want good recreation opportunities. They want to live in healthy communities and have opportunities for their kids to grow, flourish, thrive here in the state of Michigan. But yeah, then when you get to making these decisions about regulations at the legislative level, we don't see that follow through often. Michigan does have a good plan in place for mitigating climate change. The thing is, we're not going to meet that plan. We're not going to meet our targets. We're not on track. That's right.
I'm taking a piece of chalk to the blackboard right now. I'm turning the tables here on the professor. And I am writing the words direct democracy that you just used, because that is so appealing to me. That is a sexy phrase. What does that look like? I mean, in a perfect world, what is direct democracy in relation to big utilities like DTE Energy? I mean, there's a lot of tension between the public and DTE. We need to transition to clean energy. Talk more about direct democracy in relationship to a huge public utility that people feel powerless in the face of.
The way that we've seen change in this country from a environmental perspective in a more protective, healthier direction has come from large social movements demanding change. So if you go back to 1970 and the first Earth Day, I mean, it was millions of people in the streets demanding change and then voting accordingly, right? And in fact, to the point where you had Congress overriding President Nixon's vetoes of major pieces of environmental legislation, because they were hearing so consistently and from an irate public demanding change. So that's really where I think we need to go with this, because we're not getting through. Michigan, I think our legislature over time will be more responsive to our public because of the nonpartisan redistricting that we now have in the state. That's a really good thing. I think that will alleviate some of the polarization that we have and perhaps get some people in the middle that can work together. But they're not going to act unless they hear directly from voters, from people. When politicians respond and are moved by contacts from their constituents, particularly people that are in their districts that will vote for them. So it's getting on the phone, showing up in person.
It's doing a lot of work.
Doing a lot. And I hate to say
though,
to put that back on people, because but that's really where we're at, right? We've been failed by these systems, and when you talk about holding the utilities accountable, there's only so much you can do as a ratepayer that also needs to have electricity in your home, right? You're sort of somewhat limited. So it's where with a regulated utility, you really need to work through the legislature, or perhaps through, like you said, the Public Service Commission, although they're dealing with things, more on the infrastructure planning side and on the rate setting side. What we're talking about is setting good forward-looking policies, and that really needs to be done at the state legislature.
Are you saying that those who can take on more responsibility right now by writing their lawmakers and flooding the zone with phone calls and being that annoying person on social media who's posting endlessly about the issues we're facing. You're saying those are the folks who should take on more of the burden. And if you are saying that, then my question to you, Dean Schroeck, is in a fair society, what should energy costs look like for the more vulnerable people, the people who are already struggling to make ends meet and who don't have time to make those calls to lawmakers.
They don't.
Because they're working 3 jobs.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, you have to be realistic about this, right? And I'm, speaking from a position of privilege here where it's like, I can pick up the phone. I can take some time to do that, but not everybody can. You're absolutely right. And I am saying that those of us that have that ability really need to be active and engaged on this issue, like many people are on other important political issues of the day, right? Like we really need our energy generation, our infrastructure, our right to a healthy climate to be front and center in front of our legislators. So that's what I mean by that, right? And I don't like always saying this has to come back on individuals to make the change, but that's sort of where we're at, right? If we're looking at this realistically. Okay, so I think when we talk about protecting those most vulnerable here in our community, one of the things that we've advocated for quite some time is something like a lifeline type of rate. Whether it's the first number of kilowatts on a bill are at a very reduced rate, so that people can afford electricity that they need to have the lights on and to heat their homes and cook a meal, that kind of stuff. Also looking at things like
it's a guaranteed rate, or can you explain that more?
Oh, so what I'm saying there is perhaps you could have a lower rate for a number of kilowatt hours on your meter. Again, could across the board be a reduced rate, and then as you use more, it gets to be more expensive. So they've tried to do some of this tiered rate structure with like hours of the day. So right between
11 to 7 if you sign up and only use power outside of 11 to 7, which is
a reduced rate, right.
That's really hard.
I mean, what I'm talking about is on like sort of your monthly bill. It could help, again, lower income folks if you said that like a certain amount of power is at a reduced rate and then you go above that amount because you're thinking like larger homes, people that are using more devices. That's one thing. I mean, another would just be basically free power for low income folks up to a certain point, right? I mean, that sounds a little bit sort of foreign to the way we normally think about things, but if you believe that I do, that things like electricity, water, sewer, internet in these days, that these are necessities to our lives, we need to figure out a way to make sure that all of our public has the ability to enjoy and use those really necessary bits of infrastructure. So again, I think we need to look at some really dramatic changes to the way that we're generating, delivering, and charging for electricity in the state. And so I would say all options are on the table, including looking at changes to the rate structure, looking at providing a certain amount of electricity for free. And let me just mention this because I've been talking a lot about individuals, industry. I mean, this is where something that's incredibly frustrating when you look at our rate structure, we need industry to be, paying more. They do have a different rate structure, but they need to be paying more for electricity and to support the grid. Businesses, and again, this isn't popular with the Chamber of Commerce folks, but like we need businesses to pay a fair share, corporations to pay a fair share of infrastructure costs, and that means higher rates for them because we can't just keep putting this on the back of individuals and expect our society to flourish.
Nicholas Schroeck, an expert on environmental law and dean of the University of Detroit Mercy's School of Law. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, Dean Schroeck.
Thank you.